Well, hello everybody, welcome back to Red Tool House. I am still in the woods with my buddy Jeff. So we're here talking about forestry management, all the things pertaining to the forest and how it pertains to homesteaders. So welcome back, Jeff. Even though you really haven't gone anywhere, you're still standing here beside me. So what we want to talk about in this segment is why would a homesteader consider having their land timbered? Now, there's some obvious reasons why, but what are some of the cons that we talk about? So, Jeff, you've been in this industry. What do some people say? If a logging company comes in or a forester comes in and talking about timbering, what are some of the taboos or the bad stereotypes associated with timbering?
Well, there's a few.
Yeah, one or two, yeah.
And I may not have heard them all, but I've probably heard about 99% of them or seen a big percentage of them after the fact, let's say.
Sure.
A lot of landowners will call us kind of after the mistake has been made and want us to kind of put things back together, and you can't put that back together. But a lot of the mistakes a lot of the taboos were, some of them had to do with the actual land, how it was left, and some had to do with the financial outcome of the sale. I've been on some landowners that they got hammered both ways. They got a short end of the stick on the financial end because they didn't have the information that they needed from a forester or from somebody very knowledgeable working for them in the industry. When you're a landowner that you're selling timber for the first time, and you're trying to match your timber knowledge with let's say an old logger that's been out there doing this game for 30 or 40 years and knows the ins and the outs and everything, you're kind of at a big disadvantage to start. So you're kind of opening yourself up to to some possible financial hurt there. But on the land side, the horror stories are generally that the land was left in a pretty bad condition when they did the logging or the harvesting. Those and again, I've seen the after effect, and again, a forester will can alleviate a lot of those problems. Now, we're not representing that when you harvest timber that everything's going to look exactly like it did prior.
Sure, yeah.
In fact, a lot of times we don't want it to. That's the whole reason that we're doing some of the harvesting, is to change some of the conditions for the better out there.
Yeah.
But we help alleviate. We don't ever say you can have your cake and eat it too, as far as generating timber income and having your land look exactly the same, but you can get pretty close.
Yeah.
And you can actually do some improvements with different practices, and you can incorporate those into your timber sale contract, working with good reputable buyers, licensed, insured through a forester to make sure those things happen.
Okay, so to get around a lot of these negative things we've heard about timbering, it really comes back to who you're allowed to cut, who's in here managing it, all the regulations that are now put in place. There's a lot of oversight that's there now, but it really comes down to who you're allowing to do this, right?
It does, and a lot of landowners, even today in the information age that we live in, I tell every landowner, yourself included, you've got to look at your timber sale and your harvest as an opportunity, okay? As a marketing opportunity to maximize value, because you've got a competitive product there normally. That means you've got multiple buyers that are interested in your product. That's a good selling situation.
Absolutely.
That's the situation you want to be in.
Yeah,
we help you capture that with that situation. What you don't want to do from a financial standpoint, and what a lot of landowners still do, even though we do our best, everybody does, but somebody comes knocking on the door, and you take that first offer that comes along without any competitive, or realizing that it's a great opportunity, or maybe contacting a forester and to get your marketing opportunity rolling. Then you can incorporate those land improvements in and just make it make it even better. So
yeah. I like what you're saying about not taking the first offer, and I've shared with my viewers this horror story of 17 years ago I had this place timbered. Obviously you and I didn't know one another, so I used another forester at the time. But 144,000 board feet were taken off, and it was about $35,000 gross. Just over this ridge, 2 farms over, 220 acres, 1.4 million board feet taken for $12,000.
Yeah.
Was that maybe a little low, you think?
Yeah, it's a little out of kilter, isn't it?
Yeah, something doesn't pass the sniff test there somewhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, and you don't, you know, we're not pointing fingers, but it still happens a lot, and you've got to. You know, the first step that we use prior to a timber sale to prepare, and we touched on it a little bit prior, is the timber inventory and appraisal, where we are going out and gathering that data. And you know, you first have to know what you've got to sell it, whether no matter what you're selling. I mean, you know, you need to know your market, your market values, what your ranges are, and where you're at. Hardwoods can vary. Hardwoods aren't a commodity. Everybody another factor you get is landowners think, oh, well, it's lumber, right? So, you know, hardwood sawed into lumber. Yeah, yes and no. Yes, it is sawed into lumber, but hardwood, unlike pine, unlike if you go buy a 2x4 or 2x6 or whatever, hardwood is all based on the grade and the quality of the product and species. So, and those species will vary in the markets, which means that maybe, you know, maybe a few years ago, cherry was the popular in the market because, let's say that cherry was being used for, you know, it was the craze on kitchen cabinetry or trim or maybe even export markets. That could change to, well, no, cherry's a little out of fad. Now it's maple. Okay, it's a whiter product. No, now you know, it may change walnut. So all those things change, and they change. Actually, they change daily. Now, I'm not trying to, you know, complicate things, but we keep track of that on a weekly basis from the hardwood market report. What lumber's hot, what's not, what the prices are, and we track it. I mean,
So just like somebody keeps track of stock, what Walmart stock's doing today, you guys are keeping track of the hardwood market as well.
Yep.
Okay, well, good. So looking at that, so you know, getting back to the original question of why should a homesteader consider timbering, you know, the obvious thing that comes to mind for all of us homesteaders, of course, we want to be self-reliant. We want to be able to stay at home and homestead, so that always takes revenue. So the number one, of course, is money. So there's money to be had in timber, right? Regardless of the season. Obviously, there's peak and valleys. Are there good times to sell timber? Are there bad times to sell timber?
Yes, and you know, there is income to make in selling timber, and sometimes pretty good income on a per acre basis or on a whole tract basis. The dynamics of when you sell it and when it's logged, that all goes into play as part of our analysis. You don't necessarily have to log it when you sell it, okay? So, you know, we can structure a sale scenario, actual sale that you get paid lump sum up front when you do the sale closing, when you sign a timber sale agreement, but we stipulate in the contract that because of the dynamics of the property, the soil types, that the logging is only done, you know, during the drier months.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't want, you know, we don't get in there with they don't get in there with the heavy equipment and muck things up as much when the ground is very wet, very soft. So,
makes sense. Yeah.
you know, so we can put all those dynamics in play.
Cool. So obviously revenue with protection. And again, if you go back and look at some of the previous episodes where Jeff and I are talking about why you really need to get a forester involved. Don't just go don't just go hire the logging guys or the guys that knock on your door and say, hey, we want to cut your timber, we'll give you X amount of dollars for it. Why you really want to look at a forester, because he's going to be there to represent you, the property owner. So we recognize that obviously there's revenue. That's why a homesteader would consider timbering, because of the revenue. But what are some of the other benefits that maybe aren't as obvious to homesteaders when it comes to having your timber cut?
And again, that's kind of where we're kind of back to have your cake and eat it too, meaning make income and win-win, okay? Make income and improve your property, okay? Improve your land, your forest conditions. So we can take, you know, with that information that we gather out there, as far as your forest conditions and how the land lays and what your current access situation is for your property. Let's face it, if you've got 50 or 100 acres in West Virginia, you know, there's a pretty small fraction of part of it that you can use for, you know, pasture, meadow that's tillable.
Sure.
A lot of it is, you know, is non-tillable, is forest land, but you still need to access it. If you're going to, you know, one of the golden rules of forest management is you can't manage what you can't access, you know, from you know, otherwise, you know, it's just going to do, you know, what it does. So
I can speak to that, that's for sure.
so, I mean, and you know, you've got, you know, I've noticed from our tour today that you've got a nice roads and trail system that was implemented and improved from your timber harvest there 17 years ago. That, you know, it makes us makes it a heck of a lot easier for us to get around today.
Sure,
you know, to
absolutely.
do this stuff. So, so without access. You know, and it lets you enjoy your property more. I mean, whether it's for homesteading or agricultural or just to get out and take a hike and enjoy it. If you've got those roads and trails in there, you know, you can do that. We can help you implement a good roads and trails plan into your timber harvest.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you talk about, because the year before we timbered, we had the property, and it was everything I could do to even get on pieces of property,
Right.
pieces of the land that I'd not even seen.
Right.
It's like, okay, am I going to hike all the way up to there and you know, all this rough terrain? And now, yeah, we spend time in the woods constantly. Family walking, trails, driving on the side by side. It definitely has improved the use.
Makes your property bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, really, I mean, from a usability standpoint, I mean, a lot of times people don't realize really how big their property is. Just, you know, you look at it on a map, well, until you get out and walk it, you know, and if you have that roads and trail system. So it does make a bigger property, you know, a lot more usable.
Let's talk about environmental concerns. Obviously, there's a lot of environmental concerns that say you're deforesting, you hear all this type of stuff. You know, timber guys, you know, slash and burn. I think when people think of timber and they don't really know the industry, they think of Amazon rainforest getting cut down.
Right.
And we're nowhere near talking about that. So we know the environmental negative stereotypes. What are some of the environmental positives that come out of timbering?
Yeah, yeah. That's another realm that there's a lot of misinformation out there as far as deforestation. I'm not speaking of, you know, deforestation in South America or Africa in the rainforest stuff like that. I'm talking about here. Here we have very little deforestation. There's a really good book on it by Patrick Stewart. He was actually the founder of Greenpeace. He explains how from a deforestation standpoint, that really truly the only true deforestation is when you take forest land and you convert it to something else, whether it's agricultural, which is not really deforestation because those trees will actually come back in that, but basically the development, okay, whether it's roads, commercial development, putting blacktop over it, okay, that otherwise those trees will come back. Now it may not be, you know, within a time period that we're comfortable with as far as you know, from you know, our life cycle or whatever, but when you take forest land like this and you could go through, which we don't recommend it and we very rarely do unless we're doing a land use conversion to agriculture, but you could cut every tree out in here.
Right.
Okay. And landowners say, oh my gosh, if I cut every tree out, that means you know, so I got to replant trees. Absolutely not. You would be throwing your money away. All the seed source that is in the ground right now, okay, from, in this case, is white oak and hickory, but that seed source lies dormant in here. Once you put a little more light, on the forest floor, whether it be from a select cut selectively, a savanna type, or a pure regeneration cut, which means everything that it's gonna bounce up. That's why the power companies spend the big power companies spend millions of dollars every year keeping these power lines cleared from the trees that are sprouting up.
Back.
Yeah, it keeps coming back. It's called natural regeneration.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you'd also talked about some of the benefits as far as canopy health and those type of things. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, when done right and done correctly, a select cut timber harvest, that's where you're going in and either marking your trees, your larger trees to take out, or you do it on a diameter limit that's stipulated in a higher diameter limit in the contract. But, you know, with a mark sale, you can also incorporate what we call crop tree release or timber stand improvement. And so when you take out a select tree for a timber product, you will release an adjacent tree to it. And again, you're getting that bigger crown. You want that engine on there for that growth. So you can do both, with a select cut, from a management standpoint.
Yeah, and you talk about bigger crown. We're about to get pelted with acorns where we're standing here. The wind's kicking up, and the acorns have been super prolific. And from my perspective as a homesteader, timbering, obviously revenue is good. We could always use more money. But I really like the idea where you're talking about coming in selectively cutting so I can get better regenerative growth. We talked about that in our previous episode with silvopasture benefits. So I'm getting money as a benefit, but I'm also getting a healthier forest crown because those crowns are expanding. I'm getting more acorn production. I'm getting more hickory nut production. All the beauty of that just kind of manifests itself just because I've hired a company to come in and take that out, right?
Yeah, you're getting, and with that crown, comes increased growth. So what you're actually getting is faster growth on the residual trees that are left after the harvest, which is what you want. So yeah, you are getting that. The key is to make sure that on a select cut that you're not just that's the crop tree, is you want good quality smaller trees in there to grow, as opposed to what we would call like a weed tree, a low quality tree. So it's that individual tree selection to make sure that what you're growing in your growing space is growing as fast as possible after the harvest, and that you're growing the best products, trees possible.
So obviously from homesteading, where I have livestock, I've talked about bringing the pigs in here and eventually I get enough clear that I can bring some ruminants, cattle or goat or whatever. But what about homesteaders that don't necessarily have that large livestock and they really want to see wildlife improvement? Does timbering help wildlife or does that hinder wildlife?
It helps wildlife, Troy. I mean, there's a give and take, and you're changing the habitat to some extent, but as a whole, and I won't speak for every species of wildlife, but most of the game species and even the non-game species, the different bird species, and on the game species, that's primarily white-tailed deer, wild turkey, squirrel, rabbit. We deal with a lot of folks that hunt on their lands, whether they're homesteaders or in the hunting community, as far as hunt leases and land management and all that. And a big practice that is very popular now, and I think it has homesteader applications, which you were getting at. But taking your roads and trail system and incorporating a wildlife component into that, basically as far as a food plot. And there's so many different seed mixes now that are all good, environmentally sound and not invasive, that you can use based on what wildlife you're trying to attract. So you can, it's kind of a linear component. It's not like a 1 acre meadow, but linear, is good. And, so yeah, you can do a lot with those food plots on your roads, and you can widen them out a little bit in some areas, make it.
Well, I like that, and so let's look at that, because I think that's something we really want to stress, because homesteaders, if they lean over into the permaculture area, we always talk about these terms of what's called function stacking. So it is something happening on your homestead that you're putting inputs into, but it's getting more than one thing done. So I love that. So you're saying that this road that's over here that we came in on, that gave us access to this part of my property, that if it wasn't there, I would at least be ready to pass out. You probably hike a lot more than I do. I'd be ready to pass out because I've had to walk up here. Now I can bring all of our equipment up and shoot. So I've got a road that gives me access. It allows me to get in and look at those type of things, enjoy the property. Like I said, makes it bigger. But now you're saying you can turn it into a food plot. So you're actually going to reseed that road with a certain blend of mix of whatever that's going to attract certain wildlife that you're trying to attract.
Right.
So you're building habitat and you're building attractant for wildlife, but yet I'm also still using it for access. So that sounds like that's definitely one of those win-wins where you're getting.
No doubt. I mean, and I would add to that a couple other wins. You're building value in your property, just from an access standpoint. Trust me, we sell lands, timberlands and farms, and any property that not that the home, not that the goal is to sell the property, but
Sure.
everybody wants the most valuable property
Absolutely.
possible.
Yeah.
So anytime we go out and we market a very accessible property with similar forest conditions to a non-accessible property, hands down that property with access is much more valuable.
Yeah,
so
increased value.
So you've got that component, and then you've got the component, like I said, of for homesteaders and what we call woodlot management, which is managing your forest, but a lot for your own use, whether it be lumber, firewood, rustic type products, and so the roads and trails for side by sides will let you come up here if you want to cut an individual tree and drag it out with your side by side or your tractor or whatever. You'll be able to do that.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. Well, so if you're ever thinking, if you're a homesteader and you've got land and you're thinking about timbering and you hear all these negatives about timbering, do the research. Again, I can't stress enough to find a forester, talk to a forester. Now, Jeff, usually a consultation where you may be sitting on the front porch talking, foresters usually don't charge for that, right?
Right. We have to know what you're starting with, what your goals are. So I mean, call it a free consultation, but that has to be done.
Yeah. So it's a no-brainer. If you've got timberland, you've got woodland, you've got forest area, and you're thinking about it, check with a forester, check with your local forester. If you're in West Virginia, by all means, call Jeff. But have that consultation, and they can just kind of let you know where you want to start and the benefits of timbering. And keep in mind, the forester is there to protect you, the property owner. So he's going to be able, or she's going to be able to keep an eye on that, manage, make sure the process from start to finish is done to standards, to specifications, up to guidelines, and leaves your property in good standing. So consider that. So man, I appreciate you coming on again and talking about this. I know we're going to talk about some other things as well, so I appreciate you doing that. And if people want to find out more about your company, what's the website they can go to?
wvlandgroup.com. We're proud of our site. We're proud of the functionality of it, and how the guys that's developed that has made it a very good site.
Yeah, you got to watch those web developers sometimes. They fly by night. Yeah. All right. So yeah, check out wvlandgroup.com. Jeff is kind enough to say even if you're not in this area, West Virginia area, if you have some questions, you can use his contact form on the website. Send him some questions. If he's not out traipsing through the woods, he can get back with you and answer some of those questions for you. So, man, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Enjoyed it. Yep.